For 36 years, if you looked at an official map of China's Fuling district, you would find a void where a mountain should be. There was no town. There were no roads. There was no record of the thousands of souls breathing, working, and dying at the base of Jinzi Mountain. This was not a mistake of the cartographer. It was a deliberate, state-sanctioned erasure. While the rest of the world looked toward the stars during the space race, the Chinese government was looking into the dark, cold center of the Earth. They were carving a cathedral of plutonium, the world's largest artificial cave, built to manufacture the very heart of a nuclear bomb. This was Project 816. A site designed to withstand the impact of a 1 million-ton hydrogen bomb airburst, yet it couldn't survive the shifting winds of the politics that created it. Today, the Chinese state markets this labyrinth as a scenic, tourist destination, complete with neon lights and guided walks. But the lights are a distraction. They are designed to keep you from looking at the jagged walls and asking the only question that matters: what happened to the 60,000 men who were sent into this mountain and told they no longer existed? We are not here to show you a cave. We are here to investigate the cost of a war that never happened, and the lives that were buried to prepare for it. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. I want to know exactly how far these hidden stories are reaching. In the humid, mountainous terrain of the Fuling district, Jinzi Mountain stands as a monument to a silence that lasted nearly 4 decades. For the people of the neighboring regions, the mountain was a physical constant, yet for the state, it was a black hole. Within this geographical anomaly sat the town of Baitao. If you were born there between the mid-1960s and the turn of the millennium, you did not officially exist. Your birth certificate, your school records, and your identity papers were tethered to a non-place. To the outside world, Baitao was a blank space on a topographical sheet, a deliberate cartographic erasure designed to protect the most sensitive industrial secret of the Mao era. This was the ultimate investigative wound. Imagine living in a community of thousands, supporting a colossal engineering feat, yet being legally forbidden from acknowledging your own location. The residents of Baitao were the invisible people. They lived in a bifurcated reality, where the sun rose over a mountain that was officially a state secret. This wasn't merely about hiding a building, it was about the psychological trauma of being removed from the national memory. The government didn't just hide the project, they hid the people. We have to ask, what does it do to the human psyche to be told that your home, your family, and your entire existence is a secret that the state has decided is a non-event? The investigation into 816 begins here, in the shadow of a mountain that was meant to be the tomb of a town. To understand why a mountain was hollowed out by hand, we have to look at the terrifying geopolitical landscape of 1966. This was the height of the Third Front campaign, a frantic, near-frenzied industrialization of China's rugged interior. The catalyst was a breakdown in relations so severe it threatened to ignite a nuclear winter, the Sino-Soviet split. Faced with the prospect of an atomic strike from the north or a naval invasion from the east, the Chinese leadership made a radical decision. They would move their entire military-industrial heartland into the Third Front, the inaccessible, mountainous reaches of the southwest. The logic was cold and calculated. If the cities on the coast were vaporized, the revolution would survive inside the rock. Project 816 was the crown jewel of this paranoia. It was built with a single, devastating purpose: to house a nuclear reactor capable of producing plutonium-239. This is the material that sits at the core of an atomic bomb. The scale of the impossibility here is staggering. While modern engineering relies on precision machinery, the 816 labyrinth was carved with basic explosives and the raw physical labor of 60,000 soldiers. They weren't just building a factory, they were building a survival pod for a civilization that expected to be annihilated. The tension in these tunnels isn't just atmospheric, it is the lingering vibration of a country waiting for the world to end. The true investigative depth of Project 816 is not found in the concrete or the massive steel doors, but in the human cost of its silence. As we step into the central reactor hall, a staggering 20-story void carved entirely into the vertical rock, we are walking through a monument to forced labor and strategic isolation. The official records of the Cultural Revolution are notoriously opaque, but the evidence we have uncovered points to a grim reality. Officially, the state acknowledges 107 martyrs of Unit 8342, the soldiers and engineers who died during the construction. But when you consider the conditions, total darkness, primitive ventilation, and the constant threat of cave-ins, the numbers don't add up. Most of these martyrs were barely more than children, with an average age of just 21. They died for a project that was abruptly cancelled in 1984, rendered obsolete by the very geopolitics that birthed it. Billions of yuan and nearly 20 years of human life were abandoned overnight. As we begin this investigation, we must realize that the surreal beauty of the illuminated caves masks a history of erasure. The 816 site is a scar on the landscape, a place where the living were forced to become ghosts so that the state could prepare for a war that never came. The strategic decision to hollow out Jinzi Mountain was not born of geological convenience, but of a calculated, obsessive fear. In the mid-1960s, the Chinese military leadership looked at the vulnerability of their coastal industrial centers and saw a death trap. Their response was the Third Front, a massive relocation of the nation's specialized defense capabilities into the broken, vertical landscapes of the interior. The Fuling district offered the perfect veil. Here, the limestone and shale provided a natural shield against the aerial surveillance of the era. The architecture of Project 816 was designed to be a mirror image of the state's internal anxiety. It is a labyrinth stretching over 20 kilometers, consisting of 18 massive artificial caverns and over 130 secondary tunnels. This was not a singular bunker, but a subterranean city designed to function while the surface world burned. Every turn in these damp, lightless corridors was a strategic choice. The engineers weren't just moving Earth, they were constructing a fortress that could remain operational during a total collapse of the national infrastructure. To walk these tunnels today is to trace the outlines of a regime that viewed the entire planet as a potential battlefield. The sheer scale of the excavation defies standard industrial logic. It required the removal of 1.5 million cubic meters of rock, all while maintaining a level of secrecy so absolute that the workers themselves were often unaware of the full dimensions of the hive they were creating. This was the physical manifestation of a closed system, a place where the geography was weaponized to ensure that the production of the state's most lethal assets would never be interrupted by the prying eyes of an adversary or the arrival of an atomic winter. The central reactor hall of Project 816 remains one of the most unsettling engineering feats in modern history. Standing nearly 80 meters high, equivalent to a 20-story building, this massive void was carved entirely into the heart of the mountain. There is a specific, heavy silence that exists in a space of this magnitude, a reminder that every cubic inch was fought for with primitive tools and human endurance. In an era before advanced tunnel boring machines were available to the Chinese military, the excavation was a grueling, manual process. Soldiers and laborers used basic explosives to fracture the rock, then cleared the debris by hand in a cycle that repeated for nearly 2 decades. The impossibility of the hall lies in its precision. The walls had to be perfectly vertical to support the weight of the mountain above while housing the delicate, complex machinery of a nuclear reactor. This was not the work of machines, it was the work of a generation told that their sweat was the only thing standing between the nation and total erasure. The scale of the hall serves as a grim indicator of the project's ambition. It was designed to hold a massive graphite-moderated reactor, a structure that required a level of stability and cooling that seemed unattainable in such an isolated location. Yet, they persisted, hollowing out a cathedral-sized space that would never hear the hum of a functioning core. The tragedy of the reactor hall is its emptiness. It represents millions of man-hours spent in the dark, breathing in stone dust and working under the constant threat of a collapse, all to create a container for a technology that was abandoned before it could ever be activated. The structural integrity of Project 816 was not designed for the stresses of nature, but for the impact of a 1 million-ton hydrogen bomb. The Chinese leadership understood that in a nuclear exchange, the mountain itself would become a conductor of seismic energy. To counter this, the facility was engineered with a level of reinforcement that borders on the fanatical. The primary caverns are buried under 200 meters of solid rock, but the true defense lay in the internal bracing. Massive concrete linings, meters thick, were poured to absorb the shock waves of an atmospheric airburst. The steel doors guarding the entrances were designed to withstand the overpressure of a blast that would have leveled any city on the surface. This was engineering for the end of the world. The facility included sophisticated air filtration systems and independent water supplies, all intended to keep the invisible workforce alive in a post-atomic wasteland. Every bolt and every reinforced beam was a testament to a strategic doctrine that accepted the death of the surface as a certainty. The investigation into these reinforcements reveals a sobering truth. The state was more concerned with the survival of the plutonium production line than with the survival of the people outside the mountain. The 816 plant was a lifeboat for the regime's military ambitions, a place where the laws of physics were pushed to their limits to ensure that even if China's population was decimated, its ability to retaliate would remain intact. The structural resilience of the tunnel serves as a permanent record of the magnitude of the threat the state perceived, a threat so grave that it justified the literal burial of the nation's industrial future. The core purpose of Project 816 was never the generation of civilian electricity. While official narratives often used the terminology of power plants to mask the facility's true intent, the investigation reveals a singular focus on the plutonium pulse. The reactor hull was specifically configured to house a military-grade production pile designed to manufacture plutonium-239. This isotope is the essential ingredient for the primary stage of a nuclear weapon. The transition from a civilian energy project to a weapon-grade factory was not a pivot, it was the foundational goal from the first day of excavation in 1966. The massive cooling systems, which drew water from the nearby Wu River, were not scaled for a local power grid, but for the immense heat generated by a reactor running at full capacity to breed fissile material. Every technical specification within the mountain, from the lead-shielded monitoring rooms to the chemical processing areas, points toward the assembly line of an atomic arsenal. The secrecy surrounding this objective was so dense that even decades later, the state-sanctioned tours avoid discussing the specific chemical transitions intended for these caverns. This was a factory of shadows, a place where the state sought to master the alchemy of the nuclear age in total isolation. The impossibility here is the sheer audacity of trying to run a high-precision nuclear chemical cycle inside a hand-carved mountain in a remote province. It was a gamble of unprecedented proportions, fueled by a desperation to achieve strategic parity with the superpowers. The silence of the empty reactor today is a haunting reminder of how close the region came to becoming the radioactive heart of the Chinese military-industrial complex. The existence of Project 816 is the direct result of an ideological collision that almost triggered a global catastrophe. The Sino-Soviet split of the 1960s transformed former allies into existential threats overnight. When Mao Zedong looked toward the northern border, he no longer saw a socialist brother, but a revisionist adversary with a nuclear gun to China's head. This rift made the 816 plant a state necessity, a relic of a time when the leadership believed they were being squeezed between American capitalism and Soviet social imperialism. The impossible feat of hollowing Jinzi Mountain was an act of defiance against both. It was a physical rejection of the global order, an attempt to build a self-sufficient, invulnerable military core that owed nothing to foreign technology or oversight. The facility stands as a monument to the paranoia of that era, a time when the survival of the state was measured in the depth of its bunkers and the tonnage of its rock cover. The abandonment of the project in 1984 was not just a financial decision, it was a recognition that the world had changed. The thawing of relations and the shift toward economic opening rendered the paranoid architecture of the Third Front an expensive embarrassment. Yet, the mountain remains. It is a heavy, silent witness to a period when millions of lives were redirected into the earth to serve a philosophy of total war. The investigation ends this section not with a solution, but with a realization: the 816 plant was never just a building. It was a desperate, multi-billion yuan prayer for survival, answered only by the silence of the tunnels and the forgotten names of those who carved them. The recruitment of the 60,000 soldiers for Unit 8342 was a masterpiece of state deception in absolute legal erasure. These young men, many coming from the furthest rural reaches of the interior, were not told they were going to build a nuclear reactor. They were told they were serving the revolution in a capacity that required the total surrender of their identities. Before they even stepped foot on the trains heading toward the Fuling district, they were bound by a series of oaths that effectively removed them from the civilian world. Their families were given no address, no unit designation, and no geographic coordinates. They were moving into a void. The state didn't just recruit laborers, it recruited secrets. These men were selected for their health, their loyalty, and their lack of connections to the outside world, qualities that made them ideal for a project that demanded they vanish. To the government, these 60,000 individuals were modular components of a grand strategic machine, easily replaced and entirely deniable. The psychological weight of this recruitment cannot be overstated. From the moment they boarded those specialized transport cars, they ceased to be sons, brothers, or citizens. They became the invisible, a specialized caste of military laborers whose only purpose was to hollow out a mountain for a war that had not yet begun. This was the first stage of the wound, the realization that their lives were now property of a project that they were legally forbidden to name. They were walking into a landscape where the maps were blank, and their presence there was a crime against the very secrecy they were sworn to protect. Life inside the tunnels of Project 816 was a slow, biological erosion. For 24 hours a day, the soldiers of Unit 8342 lived in a state of sensory and respiratory deprivation. The air was a thick, stagnant slurry of limestone dust, cordite fumes from basic explosives, and the heavy humidity of the subterranean world. There was no natural light to regulate the human circadian rhythm, there was only the flickering of low-voltage bulbs and the oppressive weight of 200 meters of rock overhead. This was life in the pulmonary dark. Every breath taken during a 12-hour shift was a deposit of stone into the lungs of a 20-year-old. The manual nature of the excavation meant that these men were in constant, direct contact with the jagged edges of the mountain. Chronic respiratory issues and silicon-based lung damage were not just risks, they were the inevitable tax of the Third Front. The state-mandated silence meant that medical records were often sanitized or suppressed, leaving the true physical toll of the construction to be carried in the scarred tissues of the survivors. The geography of the mountain became the geography of their bodies. The cold, damp environment led to premature joint decay and fungal infections that the rudimentary military clinics were ill-equipped to treat. They were working in a landscape that was biologically hostile to human life, driven by a production schedule that prioritized the cubic meters of rock removed over the oxygen saturation of the men removing it. This was the reality of the heroic labor, a quiet, daily struggle for breath in a cathedral built for the dead. The official history of Project 816 records exactly 107 martyrs who died during the construction of the facility. However, any serious investigation into the arithmetic of sacrifice reveals a glaring discrepancy between this number and the inherent risks of the project. For 20 years, 60,000 men operated in an environment defined by high-intensity blasting, unstable geological formations, and primitive safety protocols. In any other industrial project of this magnitude during the 1960s, the death toll would have been measured in the thousands. The 107 figure is a bureaucratic convenience, a sanitized number designed to maintain the image of the project's technical perfection. It likely excludes those who died from secondary causes, respiratory failure, infection, or the long-term effects of silicon inhalation, after they were discharged or transferred. It ignores the accidents that were never logged because the unit involved was under a higher level of classification. To challenge this number is to acknowledge that the mountain is a much larger graveyard than the state admits. The evidence lies in the unofficial testimonies of survivors and the density of the work. You cannot hollow out 20 kilometers of hard rock with hand tools and basic explosives without a constant, heavy toll of human life. The state's insistence on this low number is a final act of erasure against those whose deaths did not fit the narrative of revolutionary success. Their lives were consumed by the mountain, and their passing was redacted from the ledger of history to ensure that the secret remained unblemished by the reality of its cost. Communication for the soldiers of Unit 8342 was a performance of calculated vagueness. They were permitted to write letters home, but these documents were stripped of all geographic and functional reality. They could not mention the mountain, the tunnels, the town of Baitao, or the nature of their work. A soldier might write to his mother about his health or the weather, but the letter would be postmarked from a generic military postal box located hundreds of miles away from the actual site. These were letters to nowhere. The soldiers were ghosts writing to a world they could no longer touch. If a family member fell ill or a father died, the news often arrived weeks late, or not at all, because the unit's isolation was a tactical requirement. This psychological severance was a deliberate tool of the state to ensure that no leaks could occur through the emotional channels of family life. The men were trapped in a state of permanent longing, separated from their ancestral homes by a wall of rock and a wall of law. This isolation created a unique, insular culture within the unit, a brotherhood of the erased. They were the only people in the world who knew they existed. For the families back in the provinces, their sons had simply been swallowed by the military apparatus, becoming names on a list of those serving the greater good. The trauma of this disconnection did not end when the shift did. It followed them into their barracks, where the silence of the mountain was matched only by the silence of the letters they were forbidden to truly write. The human face of the 816 tragedy is most visible in the documented ages of those who perished. When you look at the names of the martyrs that the state does acknowledge, a chilling pattern emerges. The average age was just 21 years old. These were not seasoned engineers or veteran workers, they were barely more than children, drafted into the most dangerous industrial project in the world. This is the 21-year-old ghost that haunts every corridor of the facility. These young men were sent into the dark with the promise of serving a future that they would never see. They died for a reactor that would never run, in a war that would never happen. Their deaths were often the result of the state's rush to meet impossible deadlines, pushing the Third Front initiative forward with a disregard for the biological limits of the youth. A cave-in, a misfired charge, or a simple slip in the lightless caverns ended lives before they had even begun. This was the ultimate sacrifice demanded by the paranoia of the era, the literal consumption of the next generation to fuel a defensive shell for the state. The tragedy is amplified by the fact that many of these deaths were never fully explained to the parents. A telegram would arrive stating their son had died for the motherland, with no details, no body returned, and no grave they could visit. The mountain became their final, unmapped resting place, a 20-story monument to the stolen potential of a generation that was taught that their only value was their ability to hold a shovel in the dark. When Project 816 was abruptly cancelled in 1984, the 60,000 men of Unit 8342 were not greeted with parades or national recognition. Instead, they were quietly transitioned into the shadows of a new economic era. They became the discarded generation. After nearly 2 decades of living in a non-place, they were released into a China that was rapidly forgetting the paranoia of the Third Front. Many returned to their rural villages with broken bodies, lungs scarred by dust and joints ruined by the damp, only to find that their service was a secret they were still not allowed to share. Because the project remained classified until 2002, these men could not claim the veteran benefits or the social status they had earned through their immense sacrifice. They were ghosts of a discarded philosophy, survivors of a monumental waste of human life and capital. The struggle for recognition by the survivors is the final investigative layer of the 816 story. It reveals a state that was willing to spend billions on rock and concrete, but was unwilling to provide for the men who had been consumed by the process. Even today, as the site is repackaged as a tourist attraction, the narrative is focused on the miracle of the engineering, not the ongoing health struggles of the men who built it. The investigation forces us to look past the neon-lit tunnels and see the aging faces of those who were told to vanish, and then were told to forget. Their identity remains tied to a mountain that the world now treats as a curiosity, but for them, it remains the site of their erasure. In 1984, the mountain was breathing with the mechanical effort of 60,000 men and the impending arrival of nuclear fuel. The project was 85% complete. Then, a single directive arrived from the central leadership that effectively stopped the heart of Jinzi Mountain in mid-beat. This was the Midnight Order. There was no gradual winding down, no phased transition for the thousands of workers who had spent 2 decades hollowing out the earth. Instead, the gears of the Third Front were jammed by a sudden, top-down realization that the world for which this facility was built no longer existed. The geopolitical winds had shifted. The terror of a Soviet invasion had been replaced by the pragmatism of economic opening and reform. Overnight, the most sensitive industrial secret in the nation became an expensive, subterranean liability. The order to cease construction was a cold admission that the massive expenditure of human life and national capital had been a miscalculation. For the men on the ground, the shock was total. They were standing in a fortress that was nearly ready to produce the instruments of war, only to be told that their mission was obsolete. The mountain, which had been a site of frantic activity for 18 years, fell into a heavy, artificial silence. Tools were dropped where they lay. Blueprints were rolled up and removed to classified archives. The state simply turned its back on the void it had created, leaving a 20-kilometer labyrinth to sit in the damp dark, a monument to a strategy that had been outpaced by the very history it sought to control. At the center of this frozen complex sits the massive control room, dominated by a relay panel that serves as a silent witness to a nuclear reaction that never occurred. This panel features exactly 2001 individual fuel channel monitors, each one a specialized instrument designed to track the volatile pulse of a plutonium-producing core. These monitors were the eyes and ears of the state's atomic ambitions, yet not one of them was ever allowed to flicker to life. The investigation into this room reveals a chilling level of technical readiness. The wiring is complete, the consoles are positioned for operators who would never arrive, the logic gates are set for a sequence that was never initiated. To look at these 2001 monitors is to see the exact moment the Third Front died. They represent the peak of 1970s Chinese industrial capability, a massive investment in specialized electronics and high-precision sensors that were rendered worthless before they could ever be used. The state spent billions to reach this threshold of readiness, only to abandon that pulse at the final second. These monitors are not just relics, they are the physical evidence of the gap between ideological paranoia and economic reality. They stand in perfect, eerie alignment, a grid of sensors waiting for a heat signature that was cancelled by a bureaucratic pen. The sheer density of the instrumentation in this lightless cavern reinforces the magnitude of the waste, a digital graveyard for a technology that was born of fear and killed by a change in the political climate. The calculus of obsolescence at Project 816 is a staggering indictment of the Third Front's core philosophy. Estimates suggest that billions of yuan, at a time when the nation's per capita income was among the lowest in the world, were poured into the granite of Jinzi Mountain. This wasn't just a financial drain, it was the diversion of an entire generation's technical and physical potential. The investigation into the 1984 cancellation exposes the brutal math of the state. It was cheaper to abandon a nearly finished nuclear facility than to maintain a secret that was no longer strategically viable. The shifting geopolitical landscape had turned the Soviet Union from a looming nuclear aggressor into a declining power, while the opening of China to the west meant that the Third Front strategy of inland isolation was now a barrier to progress. The project was sacrificed on the altar of the 4 modernizations. The tragedy lies in the 85% completion mark. Had the project been a total failure or only 10% finished, the loss would have been easier to quantify. But to walk away when the finish line was in sight reveals a terrifying level of disregard for the human effort already expended. Every meter of concrete and every hand-carved tunnel was now a sunk cost in a ledger that had no room for the martyrs of Unit 8342. The state simply moved the decimal point on its strategic priorities, leaving the mountain to function as a giant, subterranean vault for a dead ideology. The control room of the 816 plant was designed to be the brain of a high-stakes decision-making apparatus, a place where the fate of the nation's nuclear retaliation would be managed with cold, calculated precision. Today, it sits in a hollow stillness that is more evocative than any wreckage. The atmosphere in this space is thick with the weight of what was intended to happen here. This was the location where the state would have mastered the alchemy of plutonium, where the invisible people would have monitored the birth of the materials of destruction. The lack of sound in this room is not natural, it is the silence of a tomb. The chairs are empty, the dials are at zero, and the massive cooling diagrams on the walls remain static. The psychological impact of this space is rooted in its readiness. It is not a ruin, it is a pause. The investigation reveals that the facility was maintained in a state of warm standby for years after the cancellation, as if the leadership couldn't quite believe they were abandoning such a colossal investment. This hesitation added another layer of trauma for the skeleton crew left behind to guard the silence. They were the watchers in the wasteland, maintaining the equipment for a mission that had been officially erased. This room is the emotional anchor of the facility's failure, a high-tech nerve center with no body to command, a testament to the fact that in the world of geopolitical secrecy, the most advanced systems can be rendered ghosts by a single shift in the winds of power. Project 816 is the world's most significant monument to the unfinished. Its status as an 85% complete facility makes it more haunting than a total ruin, because it allows us to see exactly what the state was capable of achieving, and exactly what it was willing to throw away. The investigation into the final days of the project reveals a facility that was on the verge of becoming a reality. The chemical processing tanks were being installed, the ventilation systems were being tested, the barracks were prepared for the full operational staff. The abruptness of the halt created a geographical anomaly, a fully realized nuclear city that never produced a single watt of power or a single gram of plutonium. This is the ultimate non-place. It exists in the physical world but never existed in the functional world. It is a scar on the history of the Fuling district that refuses to heal because it has no purpose. The state's eventual decision to declassify the site in 2002 and turn it into a curiosity for the public is a final, ironic layer of erasure. By marketing the tragedy as a scenic wonder, the government attempts to neutralize the memory of the waste and the paranoia that built it. But the mountain remembers the pulse that never started. The 816 project remains a heavy, silent warning about the cost of state-mandated secrecy and the speed at which the lives of thousands can be rendered obsolete by the very system they were sworn to protect. The geography of the Thousand Island Lake is a manufactured deception. If you stand on the shore in Zhejiang province today, you see a vast, turquoise expanse dotted with precisely 1,078 green peaks. The state markets this as a natural wonder, a triumph of environmental beauty. But the investigation into these islands reveals a darker, vertical truth. These are not islands, they are the decapitated summits of mountains that once overlooked a sprawling, inhabited valley. Beneath the mirror-like surface of the water, the geography of 13 centuries of human civilization has been forcibly submerged. The Thousand Islands are the only remaining witnesses to a terrestrial world that was systematically erased in 1959. This is the ultimate landscape of displacement, where the peaks serve as a permanent mask for the void below. To understand this place, we must look past the scenic branding and recognize that every island is a jagged tombstone for the villages, the schools, and the ancestral graveyards that were drowned to create this artificial reservoir. The lake does not exist because of a geological shift, it exists because of a bureaucratic decision to treat an entire region as a liquid grave. This was a calculated transformation of the earth, where the beauty of the surface was bought with the total destruction of the world beneath it. The Thousand Peaks are not a gift of nature, they are the remnants of a landscape that was executed by the state to fuel a different kind of progress. In the late 1950s, the Chinese leadership faced a desperate need for industrial power to modernize the urban centers of Shanghai and Hangzhou. Their solution was the construction of the Etched River Dam, the nation's first major hydroelectric project. The decision-making process behind this dam represents a cold trade, 13 centuries of urban history for the sake of the national grid. The investigation into the state records of 1959 shows no evidence of an archaeological rescue mission or a plan to preserve the cultural heritage of the valley. The government viewed the ancient cities of Shi Cheng and Shi Cheng as technical obstacles rather than historical treasures. The history of the Sui and Tang dynasties was deemed secondary to the generation of kilowatts. In a matter of months, the gates of the dam were closed, and the rising tide began to consume the valley floor. There was a brutal efficiency to this erasure. The state prioritized the future over the past, deciding that the industrial output of the coast was worth more than the physical memory of the interior. This was not a natural disaster, it was a state-sanctioned flooding of a civilization. The dam was a machine built to convert history into electricity, leaving the residents of the valley to watch as their heritage was turned into a resource for people hundreds of miles away who would never know what had been sacrificed for their light. The geometry of erasure at Qiandao Lake is staggering in its scale. Within a single seasonal cycle, 573 square kilometers of fertile land, ancient forests, and metropolitan centers were removed from the terrestrial world. This was a total reconfiguration of the Chinese landscape. The rising water didn't just cover the land, it effectively deleted the coordinates of two ancient county seats. The investigation reveals that the flooding was so rapid that many residents were still removing their belongings as the water touched their doorsteps. This was a logistical blitzkrieg against the geography of the past. The state's maps were redrawn overnight, replacing a complex network of roads and trade routes with a blank, blue expanse. The sheer volume of water required to fill this basin, 17 billion cubic meters, acts as a heavy, liquid shroud that prevents any unauthorized access to the truth of what lies below. This was a deliberate use of water as a medium of censorship. By flooding the valley, the state ensured that the physical evidence of the displaced communities would be out of reach for generations. The topography of the region was flattened into a singular, marketable surface, hiding the jagged complexity of the world that was sacrificed. This was an act of profound geographical violence, where the earth was reshaped to fit a central plan that had no room for the ancestral landmarks of the people who lived there. Shi Cheng and Shi Cheng were not merely villages, they were established metropolitan centers of trade and culture that had thrived since the year 621. Shi Cheng, known as the Lion City, was protected by massive city walls and 5 majestic entrance gates, featuring architecture that spanned the Ming and Qing dynasties. These were vibrant urban environments with a population of thousands, centers of learning, and nodes in a regional economic network. The investigation into the submerged remains reveals that these cities were legally abandoned to the rising tide by a government that saw no value in their preservation. The state's declaration of the valley as a reservoir zone effectively stripped these cities of their legal existence. They were removed from the administrative registers before the first drop of water even reached the walls. This was a bureaucratic killing of a city. The residents were told that their ancestral homes were now technically underwater, even as they still stood on dry land. The Lion City was a testament to Chinese urban planning, with its intricate stone carvings and monumental archways, yet it was treated as a disposable container for a power project. The fact that the city remains standing under the water today is not a sign of the state's care, but a sign of the speed of its destruction. The city was killed so quickly that it didn't even have time to decay. The bureaucratic logic that sealed the fate of the Lion City was driven by the kilowatt verdict. In the planning offices of the late 1950s, the value of a 1,000-year-old civilization was calculated and compared to the industrial output of Shanghai's factories. The verdict was clear: the history of the valley was an acceptable loss for the modernization of the coast. The investigation reveals a chilling disregard for the human and cultural cost. The state determined that the hydroelectric potential of the Etched River was the highest priority, and any population or heritage in its path was a mere line item in a budget of progress. This was a technocratic erasure where the common good was used to justify the total destruction of a specific, local identity. The residents of the valley were not consulted, they were informed of their displacement. The state's logic was that a modern nation needs power more than it needs memories. By turning the valley into a reservoir, they were physically manifesting the ideology of the era, that the old world must be destroyed to make way for the new. The kilowatt verdict represents a philosophy that treats the landscape as an industrial asset to be liquidated, ignoring the spiritual and historical ties that anchor a people to their land. The lake is the liquid remains of a civilization that was traded away by people who would never have to live with the consequences of its absence. The topography of Qiandao Lake is the topography of a grave. Every island that breaks the surface is the peak of a mountain that once sheltered a human civilization. The investigation into the scenic water body forces us to acknowledge that this is a mass shroud. Beneath the tranquil, turquoise surface lies a world of drowned schools, ancestral temples, and personal histories that were never meant to be forgotten. The lake functions as a beautiful lie, a way for the state to repackage a history of displacement and destruction as a tourism asset. The Thousand Island Lake is a brand that masks the reality of a mass cultural execution. When your audience looks at the 4K footage of these waters, they are looking at the site where an entire way of life was ended to fuel a distant industrial dream. The human consequence is buried under 40 meters of cold, constant temperature water, preserved but inaccessible. The lake is a monument to the irony of Chinese progress. The ancient city of Shi Cheng is only immortal today because it was killed by its own government's ambition. This investigation reveals that the beauty of the region is a distraction from the truth of its creation. The land was not just flooded, it was murdered. The Thousand Islands are the only parts of the body that remain above the surface, a permanent reminder of the civilization that was sacrificed to keep the lights on in a world that has forgotten its name. The thermal conditions at the bottom of the reservoir have created a vault that defies the natural laws of decay. Between 26 and 40 meters below the surface, the water temperature remains locked in a constant range between 10 and 20 degrees Celsius. This narrow thermal window, shielded from the ultraviolet radiation of the sun and the fluctuating temperatures of the atmosphere, has effectively turned the lake into a biological stabilizer. In a terrestrial environment, the wooden structures, the intricate brickwork, and the organic materials of a 700-year-old city would have been eroded by wind, rain, and the relentless cycle of freezing and thawing. Here, in the lightless pressure of the deep, the Lion City was removed from the world of air and placed into a liquid stasis. The investigation into the site by specialized diving teams reveals that the lack of oxygen and the consistent cold have prevented the microorganisms that typically consume historical ruins from gaining a foothold. This was a transition from a living city to a laboratory for preservation. The state's decision to flood the valley didn't just drown the architecture, it pickled it in a massive, high-pressure tank of fresh water. The thermocline acts as a physical boundary between the modern world of the surface and the perfectly preserved 7th century reality of the bottom. This is not a slow accumulation of damage over centuries, but a sudden, high-pressure pause. The city did not crumble into a ruin, it was stabilized by the weight of the very element that destroyed its function. The water is both the executioner and the protector of the metropolitan memory, creating a geographical anomaly where the past is more physically intact than many historical sites on the surface that have been subjected to the elements and the wear of human activity. The perimeter of the Lion City is defined by massive city walls and 5 monumental entrance gates that remain standing upright in the silt. In traditional Chinese urban planning, a city of this importance was built with 4 gates, aligned with the cardinal directions. However, Shi Cheng was an anomaly, featuring 2 gates on its western face to accommodate the complex trade routes and water access of the Sui dynasty. Today, these gates stand as the sentinels of a drowned metropolis, their heavy stone lintels still supporting the weight of the structures above them. The investigation into the structural integrity of these walls reveals a level of engineering that has survived the immense pressure of 17 billion cubic meters of water. The gates are not just gaps in a wall, they are sophisticated architectural statements of power and permanence that were meant to last for millennia on the surface. To find them 40 meters deep, still perfectly aligned, is a haunting experience. These were the thresholds where thousands of people passed daily, where taxes were collected and travelers were vetted. Now, they are the entrances to a silent, lightless void. The fact that they have not collapsed under the weight of the reservoir is a testament to the density of the original construction. The state's flood did not break the bones of the city, it simply filled its lungs with water. These 5 gates are the physical evidence of a metropolitan identity that was so robust it refused to crumble, even when its government decided that its existence was no longer convenient for the National Industrial Plan. Beneath the thermocline, the 265 monumental archways of the Lion City function as the primary stone witnesses to a culture that was sacrificed for power. These archways, many dating to the Ming and Qing dynasties, are decorated with carvings that are so sharp they appear to have been finished yesterday. Because the city was removed from the air, the erosion that typically softens the features of stone monuments never occurred. The dragons, lions, and phoenixes etched into the granite and limestone remain unweathered, their scales and feathers as distinct as the day they were carved. This is the irony of the liquid grave. The city is more visually articulate now than it would have been had it remained on land. The investigation reveals that the intricate details of the lintels and the commemorative inscriptions on the arches are still legible, documenting the names of local families and the honors bestowed upon them by long-dead emperors. These stones were meant to tell a story to future generations, to anchor the identity of the valley in a permanent, physical record. By flooding the city, the state attempted to interrupt that story, but the water inadvertently protected it. The carvings are a silent, high-definition record of a civilization that was deemed secondary to a hydroelectric dam. They represent a massive investment in artistry and local pride that was liquidated in a single season. To see these lions underwater is to recognize the magnitude of what was lost. These are not just decorations, but the fingerprints of a society that believed its presence on the earth was eternal, unaware that its own state would eventually decide to trade its stone history for the temporary flash of a light bulb. The layout of Shi Cheng provides a perfectly preserved urban blueprint of the Sui dynasty, a map of 7th century Chinese urban planning that has been frozen in time. The investigation into the street grid reveals a sophisticated network of main thoroughfares and secondary alleys, all paved with the original flagstones. This was a metropolitan center designed for trade, governance, and social hierarchy. The central administrative buildings, the schools, and the expansive courtyards of the wealthy merchant class are still positioned exactly where they were in 621. This is not a reconstruction or an archaeological interpretation, it is the physical city itself, standing in its original configuration. The state's decision to flood the valley was a violent intervention in this geography, an attempt to override a 1,000-year-old urban logic with the singular, industrial logic of the reservoir. Yet, the blueprint remains legible under the water. The alignment of the houses, the drainage systems, and the market squares all speak to a complex, thriving society that had mastered the landscape over dozens of generations. The city was a machine for living, a center of human continuity that was suddenly disconnected from the terrestrial world. By diving through these streets, we are tracing the actual path of a civilization that was told its geography was no longer valid. The urban plan of the Lion City is a record of everything that was taken, a metropolitan density that was sacrificed to create a blank, blue surface for the benefit of a modern state that had no interest in the architectural wisdom of its ancestors. The survival of the Lion City is a haunting irony, a state of immortality that was only achieved through its execution. Had the city remained above the surface, it likely would have been modernized, dismantled, or eroded by the rapid urbanization of the late 20th century. By drowning the metropolis in 1959, the state unintentionally created a time capsule that preserved the very history it intended to erase. The investigation concludes this section with the realization that the city's presence today is a permanent indictment of the ambition that killed it. It exists as an instant ruin, a place that was moved from the present into the past in a matter of months. This is a form of preservation through destruction. The city is immortal only because it is dead. The fact that the stone lions and the grand archways are still standing is a reminder that the physical memory of a people is harder to destroy than the state anticipated. The reservoir was meant to be a tool of progress, a way to turn a backward valley into a modern energy resource. Instead, it became a mass shroud for a culture that refuses to decay. The Lion City sits 40 meters deep, a heavy, silent witness to the cost of the kilowatt verdict. It is a place where the geography of the past and the technology of the future collided, leaving behind a sunken metropolis that stays exactly as it was on the day the water arrived, a frozen pulse of human history that the state can no longer reach or reclaim. The execution of the 1959 displacement order was a masterclass in top-down logistical trauma. For the 290,000 residents of the valley, there was no period of consultation, no public debate, and no alternative offered by the central planning committees. The state had determined that the valley was a sacrifice zone, and the human population was treated as a secondary variable in a hydraulic equation. The investigation into the original directives reveals a brutal timeline where families were given only weeks to dismantle lives that had been anchored in the same soil for dozens of generations. This was not a move, it was an exile. The state provided rudimentary transport, often nothing more than flatbed trucks or manual carts, and told the people to carry what they could before the valley became a lake. There was a chilling efficiency to the way the bureaucracy stripped these citizens of their land rights and their ancestral identity in a single stroke of a pen. The logistics of this displacement were designed to break the resistance of the local population by making the rising water an inevitable, looming reality. By the time the first gates of the dam were closed, the social fabric of the region had already been shredded. The state didn't just move people, it disassembled a functioning society, turning 290,000 productive citizens into a mass of migrants whose only remaining connection to their home was the memory of a landscape that was rapidly being deleted from the terrestrial world. The vanishing shoreline of the Xianan River Valley remains the most vivid memory for the survivors of the 1959 flood. As the reservoir began to fill, thousands of families retreated to the higher slopes, standing on the new, artificial hillsides to watch the water consume the coordinates of their existence. This was the psychological breaking point of the displacement. From their vantage points, they watched the rising tide enter the windows of the schools where their children had learned, the markets where they had traded, and the ancestral homes where their grandparents had died. There was no dignity in this destruction, it was a slow, relentless drowning of a civilization. The investigation into survivor testimonies reveals a profound sense of helplessness as the landmarks of their lives were converted into underwater hazards for a hydroelectric project. The water did not distinguish between a peasant's hut and a centuries-old temple. It simply rose, erasing the physical evidence of their history inch by inch. This was the moment the beautiful lie of the lake was born. To the engineers at the dam, the rising water represented the accumulation of potential energy. To the people on the slopes, it represented the liquidation of their heritage. They stood in a world that was being turned into an island chain, watching their fertile farmland disappear beneath a turquoise shroud, knowing that the geography of their ancestors was now a forbidden zone, accessible only to the silt and the cold. The resettlement of the 290,000 was a betrayal of the promise of the new China. While the state-mandated propaganda of the era spoke of pioneers building a glorious future in the interior, the reality was a desperate struggle for survival on barren hillsides and in distant, unfamiliar provinces. Many of the migrants were moved to rocky, unproductive land where the soil could not support the intensive agriculture they had practiced in the fertile valley for centuries. The investigation into the resettlement zones reveals a history of systemic neglect. These families were often viewed as a burden by the host communities, leading to decades of social friction and economic marginalization. They were the damned of the dam, a population whose sacrifice for the national grid had left them in a state of permanent poverty. The state had traded their self-sufficiency for a hydroelectric dream that they would never personally benefit from. Instead of the modern housing and infrastructure they were promised, many lived in makeshift shelters for years, their status as migrants becoming a hereditary label of disadvantage. This was the human consequence of the kilowatt verdict, a generation of people whose ancestral wealth and land were converted into electricity for the factories of Shanghai, leaving them with nothing but the rocky slopes of a landscape that no longer recognized them as its own. The loss of the ancestral graveyards is the most enduring wound in the history of the 290,000. In the cultural logic of the region, the lineage of a family is anchored to the physical site where the ancestors are buried. By flooding the valley, the state did not just destroy homes, it severed the spiritual connection between the living and the dead. The investigation into the displacement reveals that there was no systematic plan to relocate the millions of graves that occupied the valley floor. As the water rose, the residents were forced to leave their ancestors behind, knowing that the tombs of their fathers and grandfathers were being converted into the foundation of a reservoir. This was an act of profound cultural violence. In the Chinese tradition, a grave that is lost or neglected is a source of eternal shame and spiritual unrest. The migrants carried this weight with them to their new homes, a trauma that could not be resolved by the promise of industrial progress. The state's decision to prioritize power over the sanctity of the dead effectively orphaned an entire population. The graveyards of Shi Cheng and Shi Cheng are still there, 40 meters deep, covered in a layer of fine silt, a silent and submerged ancestry that haunts the scenic beauty of the islands. This was the ultimate erasure. The state didn't just take the future of the 290,000, it took their past, leaving them to mourn in a landscape where their dead were out of reach. For 40 years, the history of the 290,000 displaced was treated as a technical footnote in the success story of the Xiamen River Dam. The state maintained a wall of silence around the human tragedy of the flooding, focusing the national narrative on the engineering miracle and the industrial output of the hydroelectric plant. The investigation into the media of the 1960s and 70s reveals a total absence of the migrant perspective. They were the invisible people of the Zhejiang interior, their struggles for recognition and compensation suppressed in the name of national unity. This was a deliberate policy of state-mandated amnesia. The government understood that to acknowledge the trauma of the 290,000 was to question the morality of the progress they were selling to the world. The displacement was framed as a voluntary act of revolutionary sacrifice, a lie that the survivors were forced to maintain under the threat of political reprisal. This silence lasted until the turn of the millennium, a 4-decade gap where the memory of the drowned cities was preserved only in the private grief of the families who had lived there. The state had effectively buried the story under the same 17 billion cubic meters of water that covered the Lion City. The beautiful lie was maintained not just through geography, but through a systematic control of information that ensured the world saw only the turquoise surface and never the human wreckage at the bottom. The rediscovery of the wound occurred in 2001, when a team of divers and a local tourism official forced the state to acknowledge what lay beneath the water of Qiandao Lake. This expedition was not an archaeological mission, it was a collision between the scenic brand and the reality of the submerged metropolis. As the first images of the perfectly preserved gates and archways of Shi Cheng reached the public, the 40-year silence was shattered. The investigation reveals that this rediscovery reopened the generational trauma of the 290,000. For the survivors and their children, the images were a physical validation of a history they had been told to forget. It was proof that their ancestral world was not a myth, but a standing reality that had been stolen from them. The state's response was to quickly pivot, attempting to commodify the ruins as an underwater adventure for elite tourists. This was a final, cynical act of erasure. The site of a mass displacement was now being repackaged as a playground. But for the families who watched the shoreline vanish in 1959, the images of the Lion City are a reminder of a debt that has never been paid. The rediscovery did not heal the wound, it exposed the depth of the betrayal. The lake remains a monument to the irony of Chinese progress, a place where the geography of the past is visible but dead, a permanent indictment of the state that decided 290,000 lives were an acceptable price for a few billion kilowatts. In January 2010, a bureaucratic decree in the Hunan province effectively stripped a 1,000-meter-high quartz sandstone pillar of its ancestral identity. For millennia, the peak was known to the local population as the Southern Sky Column, a name that anchored the mountain to the geography of the Woliniuan region. Overnight, the state-sanctioned management of the Zhangjiajie National Forest Park officially renamed the peak Avatar Hallelujah Mountain. This was not an organic cultural shift or a tribute to the natural world. It was a calculated, top-down identity swap designed to capitalize on a global film franchise. The investigation into the timing of this announcement reveals a desperate move by the local government to tether an ancient geological landmark to a foreign intellectual property. By adopting the name of a fictional, floating moon from a Hollywood blockbuster, the state sent a clear message: the historical and spiritual lineage of the mountain was an obstacle to its potential as a high-yield commercial asset. This was the first stage of the colonization of the peaks. The name change functioned as a linguistic land grab, where the state used the power of branding to overwrite the indigenous memory of the land. The Southern Sky column ceased to exist in official registers, replaced by a title that belonged to a corporate entity thousands of miles away. This was the commodification of a deity, a process where the physical reality of the mountain was secondary to its value as a marketing tool. The local authorities didn't just change a signpost, they initiated a systemic erasure of the mountain's history, turning a silent, terrestrial giant into a prop for a global media event. The overriding of the Tujia, Bai, and Miao people's connection to the Zhangjiajie forest is a case study in cultural hollowing. For these ethnic minorities, the Southern Sky column was never just a geological formation or a scenic backdrop. It was a sacred entity, a silent protector that had been a central pillar of their spiritual world for 3,000 years. Their relationship with the land was built on a foundation of communal management and ancestral reverence. The investigation into the 2010 renaming reveals that the local indigenous communities were never consulted about the transition to Avatar Hallelujah Mountain. Their spiritual vocabulary was replaced by the vocabulary of a film studio. This was a state-sanctioned branding exercise that prioritized the expectations of international tourists over the lived reality of the host communities. By hollowing out the indigenous meaning of the mountain, the state prepared the landscape for a rapid industrial transformation. The Tujia people's ancestral relationship with the peaks was treated as a decorative element, a folk tradition to be staged for visitors rather than a legitimate claim to the land's identity. This process of hollowing ensured that the mountains were no longer defined by the people who lived among them, but by the management regimes that controlled the access gates. The state effectively evicted the gods of the Tujia to make room for a fictional mythology that was more profitable, leaving the local population to function as the entrepreneurial staff of a landscape that had been stripped of its original soul. The decision to use Hollywood as a sovereign tool for the branding of Zhangjiajie exposes the cold logic of the modern Chinese tourism industry. The state understood that to maximize global ticket sales, the ancient geological landmarks of Welingyuan needed to be repackaged into a recognizable, consumer-friendly format. By tethering a 1,080-meter peak to a foreign franchise, the government was not just seeking revenue, it was exercising a form of soft power dominance over the landscape. The investigation into the marketing strategies used after 2010 shows a deliberate effort to align the floating mountains of the film with the actual quartz pillars of the forest park. This was a forced synchronicity where the reality of the earth was made to conform to the CGI-rendered world of cinema. The state used the global reach of a Hollywood blockbuster to ensure that Zhangjiajie would become a must-see destination for a Western audience that might otherwise have no interest in the regional history of Hunan. This was a calculated sacrifice of cultural sovereignty. The mountain was turned into a satellite of a global media empire, a physical manifestation of a brand that the state could control and monetize. The sovereignty of the Tujia over their own peaks was replaced by a state-managed corporate identity, ensuring that every visitor to the Hallelujah Mountain was participating in a state-sanctioned narrative that had more to do with the box office than with the actual history of the earth. The marketing of a deity into a high-yield industrial product represents the final stage of the commercialization of Welingyuan. Once the Southern Sky column was renamed, the mountain was no longer viewed through the lens of geological time or spiritual significance. It became a unit of production in a massive, top-down tourism machine. The investigation into the park's financial records reveals a staggering increase in revenue following the identity swap, fueled by the arrival of millions of visitors seeking a connection to a fictional world. To accommodate this influx, the state treated the landscape as an industrial site. The peaks were colonized by extreme engineering projects, including the world's tallest outdoor lift, which was carved directly into the face of a cliff to provide 4K accessibility to the summits. This was the vertical industrialization of a sacred space. The mountain was no longer a silent entity to be respected from a distance, it was a resource to be extracted and consumed. The staged authenticity of the region became the primary product, where the cultural heritage of the ethnic minorities was reduced to a series of performances and souvenirs. The deity had been successfully converted into a product, a process that required the total hollowing out of its original meaning. The state's management regime prioritized the efficiency of the scenic experience over the ecological and spiritual health of the forest, ensuring that the mountains were anchored not by their history, but by the heavy weight of a global commercial machinery. The architecture of displacement at Zhangjiajie begins with the simple act of changing a name, but it ends with the total reconfiguration of the human relationship with the land. The investigation concludes that the renaming of the southern sky column was the first step in a larger process of hollowing out the actual history of the landscape. By replacing an indigenous title with a fictional one, the state initiated a sequence of events that removed the local population from the decision-making process and replaced their traditional ways of life with a state-approved version of their own culture. This is the irony of the floating mountains. They are anchored by a heavy human cost. The Tujia, Bai, and Miao people didn't just lose the name of a peak, they lost their right to define the meaning of their own geography. The state-managed version of the forest park is a place where the past is a commodity and the future is a revenue stream. The change in terminology was a tool of erasure, a way to signal that the old world was no longer relevant in a China that was looking toward the global market. The mountain remains a physical reality, but its identity is now a ghost of a corporate brand, a permanent reminder of the speed at which a sovereign state can overwrite the sacred memory of its own people to maximize the value of a high-yield industrial asset. In 1999, the decision was made to execute an engineering feat that would permanently alter the physical profile of the Wolinghuan quartz forest. The construction of the Bailong elevator was not a celebration of the natural world, but a high-velocity intervention in it. This massive, 326-meter vertical lift was carved directly into the face of a primary sandstone pillar, a structure that had taken millions of years to form through the patient work of erosion and tectonic shift. To the state-managed development teams, the mountain was not a sacred entity or a geological marvel, it was a logistical barrier to revenue. The investigation into the original environmental impact assessments reveals a disregard for the long-term structural integrity of the pillar. They drilled, blasted, and anchored thousands of tons of steel and glass into the living rock to create a shortcut for millions of visitors. This was the first major scar on the cliff, a mechanical parasite that turned a silent, inaccessible summit into a high-throughput industrial platform. The sheer scale of the intrusion served notice that the Wolinghuan scenic area was no longer a wilderness, but a vertical factory for the production of tourist experiences. The state traded the quiet sanctity of the climb for the efficiency of a 2-minute ride, ensuring that the mountain's value was measured solely by the number of people who could be transported to its peak in a single hour. This was the beginning of the vertical industry, where the geography of the earth was treated as a mere scaffold for the machinery of mass consumption. The mechanical industrialization of the Zhangjiajie summits is driven by a singular requirement: throughput. The Bailong elevator is designed to move 18,000 visitors every single day, a relentless cycle of ascent and descent that treats the mountain like a skyscraper. The investigation into the park's logistics reveals that this volume of human traffic is not sustainable for a delicate quartz sandstone ecosystem. To handle this influx, the summits have been paved, railed, and electrified, turning the natural topography into a controlled corridor of consumption. This is the industrialization of the wilderness. Every person who reaches the top is a unit of revenue, and the elevator is the primary engine of that extraction. The pressure on the infrastructure is constant, requiring a massive support network of power lines, maintenance tunnels, and waste management systems that are hidden from the primary walkways. This focus on throughput over preservation has created a bifurcated landscape, a scenic surface for the cameras and a mechanical reality behind the scenes. The mountain is no longer allowed to exist in its own time, it has been synchronized with the schedule of a global tourism market. The state's management regime prioritized the speed of the experience, ensuring that no one has to linger or reflect on the physical cost of their presence. The result is a landscape that has been optimized for the gaze but hollowed out by the very machinery that makes it accessible. Recent investigative findings from early 2025 have exposed a grim reality beneath the primary tourist paths of Wulingyuan. While the surface is maintained for high-definition photography, the subterranean world of the park has become a dumping ground for the excesses of the vertical industry. Explorations into the karst caves located directly below the heavy traffic summits have revealed massive accumulations of plastic waste, discarded food containers, and construction debris. These caves, which serve as the natural filtration system for the region's water table, are now filled with the refuse of millions of visitors. This is the 2025 Waste Revelation, a physical indictment of the park's rapid infrastructure expansion. The investigation reveals that the waste management systems, designed for a much smaller volume of people, have been overwhelmed by the state's drive for maximum throughput. The runoff from these contaminated caves is poisoning the very streams that give the forest its lush, emerald appearance. This is the hollowing of the mountain from the inside out. The state markets a pristine environment, yet the internal anatomy of the rock is being used as a landfill. The discovery of this subterranean garbage is a reminder that the 4K beauty of the summits is a thin, artificial layer. Beneath the feet of the crowds lies a poisoned geography, a hidden casualty of a management philosophy that views the landscape as an industrial asset to be liquidated rather than a heritage to be protected. The ecological trampling of the Zhangjiajie forest extends far beyond the visible scars on the cliffs. The biological impact of moving millions of people through a concentrated area has led to a systematic deterioration of the mountain's core health. The investigation into the regional water tables shows an alarming rise in chemical pollutants, a direct result of the runoff from the soaps, cleaners, and industrial fluids required to maintain the park's mechanical infrastructure. This is the invisible price of the vertical industry. The quartz sandstone pillars, though seemingly immovable, are part of a delicate balance that is being crushed by the weight of extreme foot traffic. Soil compaction along the walkways has killed the root systems of ancient trees, leaving them as standing skeletons on the edge of the precipice. The state's management teams have responded by introducing non-native plants and chemical fertilizers to maintain the scenic aesthetic, further disrupting the local biodiversity. This is a process of ecological replacement, where a living, self-sustaining forest is turned into a managed garden. The mountain is being treated as a stage set that must be kept green at any cost, even if that cost is the permanent loss of the species that once called it home. The trampling is not just physical, it is chemical and biological, an all-encompassing pressure that is slowly hollowing out the ecological identity of the Wulingyuan peaks to serve the demands of a high-definition tourist market. The high-definition deception of the Wulingyuan scenic area is the ultimate investigative payoff of this section. By providing 4K accessibility through extreme engineering like the Bailong elevator, the state has created a curated version of the mountain that masks its physical deterioration. The investigation concludes that the more accessible the peaks become, the more their actual substance is eroded. The scenic experience is a distraction, a way for the state to monetize a landscape while simultaneously destroying the conditions that make it unique. The mountain is being used as a prop in a state-sanctioned branding exercise, its quartz pillars turned into billboards for a global media empire. This is the irony of the modern Chinese landscape. The technology that allows us to see the mountain in such staggering detail is the same technology that is killing it. The floating peaks of Avatar are anchored by a massive subterranean pile of refuse and a broken ecological heart. The state's management regime has succeeded in creating a high-yield industrial asset, but they have failed to protect the deity they renamed. As we look at the breathtaking vistas from the elevator, we are participating in a performance of preservation that ignores the contaminated caves and the scarred cliffs. The investigation reveals that the unseen cost of this beauty is the permanent hollowing of the earth, a process where the physical reality of the mountain is traded for a digital image that can be sold to the highest bidder. The nationalization of the ancestral lands of the Tujia people was not a gradual shift, but a legal seizure that redefined the geography of the Wulingyuan region. For centuries, these forests and quartz pillars were managed through a system of communal ownership, where the land was a living resource passed from one generation to the next. The investigation into the 1980s and 90s land use decrees reveals a systematic reclassification of these sacred spaces as state-owned assets. This was a bureaucratic eviction of an entire culture's territorial rights. By designating the area as a national forest park, the central government effectively stripped the Tujia of their sovereignty over the landscape. The state didn't just take the timber and the stone, it took the legal right of the people to exist on their own terms within their ancestral boundaries. The forests where their grandfathers had hunted and gathered medicinal herbs were suddenly off limits, protected not for the people who lived there, but for the revenue they could generate as a state-managed commodity. This was the foundational act of hollowing. The Tujia were forced to transition from owners of the mountain to subjects of a management regime that prioritized the national industrial plan over indigenous survival. The legal framework of the park turned their home into a specialized zone where every tree and every peak belonged to a department in a distant city. The displacement was not always physical, it was a legal erasure of the communal bond, ensuring that the wealth of the land would flow out of the mountains and into the hands of the state, leaving the original inhabitants as guests in their own history. The performance mandate is the most visible manifestation of the staged authenticity that now defines the Tujia experience in Zhangjiajie. Once the land was nationalized, the state realized that the physical presence of the ethnic minorities could be converted into a secondary industrial product. The investigation into the park's cultural programming reveals a system where indigenous families are essentially paid to act out a sanitized, state-approved version of their own heritage. This is a forced choreography of culture. The Tujia are required to wear traditional costumes, perform ancient songs, and demonstrate primitive crafts for the benefit of the thousands of visitors who arrive daily via the Bailong elevator. This is not a living culture, it is a museum exhibit that happens to be alive. The state dictates the timing, the content, and the aesthetic of these performances to ensure they align with the global branding of the avatar landscape. This process of hollowing replaces the genuine, private rituals of the community with a public spectacle designed for maximum throughput. The Tujia are no longer allowed to evolve or adapt on their own terms, they are frozen in a state of perpetual, folk, performance to satisfy the gaze of the tourist. This is a psychological tax on the community, forcing them to participate in the commodification of their own identity. The mountain is the stage, and the people are the props, used to provide a thin layer of ethnic flavor to a landscape that has been structurally and legally stripped of its indigenous soul to serve the demands of a high-yield commercial market. The architectural mimicry within the Wallinyuan region serves as a physical record of the state's drive to replace the authentic with the efficient. For generations, the Tujia lived in Diagiela, unique stilt houses constructed of local wood and stone that followed the natural contours of the steep mountainsides. These buildings were a manifestation of their ecological and social history. The investigation into the park's development history reveals a systematic campaign of demolition aimed at these original structures. They were deemed disorderly and inefficient for the high-density tourism the state envisioned. In their place, the government constructed reinforced concrete replicas designed to mimic the appearance of traditional architecture while accommodating the logistical needs of thousands of visitors. This was the hollowing of the home. The modern replicas are essentially stage sets, concrete boxes with a thin veneer of traditional styling. They lack the structural wisdom and the communal history of the originals. By replacing the actual housing with these state-sanctioned mimics, the government effectively deleted the physical fingerprints of the Tujia from the land. This is architecture as a tool of erasure. The tourists see a traditional village, but the materials, the scale, and the purpose of the buildings are entirely industrial. The Tujia are forced to live and work in these sanitized spaces, participating in a visual lie that prioritizes the scenic aesthetic over the lived reality of their culture. The landscape is being turned into a theme park where even the walls are a performance, leaving no room for the actual history of the people who built the original foundations. The economic enclosure of the Zhangjiajie Mountains is maintained through a predatory permit system that prevents local Tujia families from participating in the wealth generated by their own land. Before the nationalization of the park, the economy was based on the direct exchange of local resources and handicrafts. Today, the investigation into the park's commercial regulations reveals a high-walled monopoly. To sell even the simplest goods, a bottle of water or a hand-carved souvenir, within the scenic zone, a family must navigate a complex bureaucracy and pay exorbitant fees for state-issued permits. These costs are intentionally set at a level that most local residents cannot afford, effectively clearing the way for large, state-linked corporations to dominate the market. This is a form of economic strangulation. The Tujia, who once had a direct relationship with the resources of the mountain, are now restricted to the lowest rungs of the tourism hierarchy. They are the janitors, the security guards, and the performers, while the actual profit from the avatar branding flows to external entities. This enclosure ensures that the local population remains dependent on the state-managed system for their survival. They are forbidden from selling their own goods in their own mountains, a policy that transforms their ancestral home into a closed industrial site. The hollowing of the Tujia is completed by this financial extraction. They are stripped of their land, then their culture, and finally their economic agency, leaving them as a captive labor force in a landscape that has been converted into a high-yield global asset. The linguistic erasure occurring in the Wallinyuan region is the most subtle and damaging layer of the hollowing process. As the state prioritized the avatar global market, the linguistic landscape of the mountains was rapidly reconfigured. The Tujia language, which carries the specific ecological and historical knowledge of the quartz forest, has been systematically sidelined in favor of Mandarin and English. The investigation into the local educational and tourism requirements reveals a top-down pressure on the younger generation to abandon their native tongue. To secure a job in the lucrative tourism sector, the only major employer left in the region, proficiency in state-sanctioned languages is mandatory. This has created a generational rift. The elders, who hold the stories and the sacred names of the peaks, find themselves unable to communicate their heritage to grandchildren who are being trained as the entrepreneurial staff for an international audience. The loss of the language means the loss of the mountain's original identity. When the name Southern Sky Column is replaced by Avatar Hallelujah Mountain, a whole set of geographic and spiritual concepts is deleted from the human record. The Tujia language is a threat to the beautiful lie of the park because it contains the truth of the people's sovereignty. By ensuring its decline, the state ensures that the indigenous memory of the land will eventually fade into a silent, unmapped past, leaving only the official, marketable version of the landscape to survive in the high-definition future. The Museum of the Living is the final investigative thought on the trauma of the Tujia. To walk through the scenic zones of Zhangjiajie is to walk through a landscape that has been converted into a human exhibit. The people who once belonged to this land are now part of the attraction, their lives managed and performed for a global audience that treats their heritage as a backdrop for photography. This is the ultimate hollowing, the transition from a sovereign culture to a tourist commodity. The investigation concludes that the staged authenticity of the ethnic minorities is a form of psychological displacement. They have not been moved physically across a border, but they have been moved out of their own history. They are forced to live in a state of permanent performance, where their daily activities, eating, working, and celebrating, are monitored and monetized by the state. This is a landscape where the people have become ghosts of their own identity, participating in a system that took their land and then paid them to act as if they were still part of it. The mountain is no longer a site of communal life, it is an industrial platform where the past is a product and the people are the staff. The tragedy of the Tujia is the irony of their survival. They are preserved as a visual element of the park, but their actual power, their language, and their economic agency have been submerged beneath the weight of a multi-billion yuan branding exercise. They are the living witnesses to a world that was erased to make way for a Hollywood franchise. The discovery of the artificial void in the Gobi Desert did not occur through traditional exploration, but through the digital eyes of a global civilian population. In the vast, unmapped stretches of the Gansu and Xinjiang provinces, satellite imagery began to reveal a series of geometric anomalies that defied geological logic. These were not the ruins of an ancient Silk Road outpost or the foundations of a new industrial city. They were massive, intersecting white lines, perfectly straight, spanning kilometers across the scorched earth. The investigation into these coordinates reveals a deliberate absence of official state documentation. While the surrounding terrain is a natural wasteland of gravel and shifting sand, these structures appear as a sudden, high-contrast intervention. They are the impossible grids, a collection of patterns so precise they can only be read from the edge of space. The state's refusal to acknowledge these sites transformed them into a global mystery, a digital frontier where thousands of people began to map the outlines of a secret. This was the first indication that the desert was no longer a barrier to human activity, but a canvas for a specialized kind of infrastructure. The void of the Gobi had been weaponized. By hollowing out the terrestrial geography of the north, the state created a specialized zone where the only intended audience was a lens orbiting hundreds of miles above the surface. These are not buildings, they are a language of light and scale, a physical message sent from the earth to the machines that now monitor every square meter of the national territory. To understand the Gobi grids, we must stop viewing them as construction and begin viewing them as hardware. These massive white lines are the physical components of a planetary-scale optics system. The investigation into the material composition of these patterns reveals they are often made of a highly reflective, specialized coating, sometimes a form of white paint or crushed stone, applied directly to the desert floor. They are designed to interact with the electromagnetic spectrum in a very specific way. These are not roads to nowhere, they are optical calibration targets. In the world of high-altitude surveillance, a spy satellite must be constantly tuned to account for atmospheric distortion and the degradation of its sensors. The Gobi provides the perfect, stable environment for this technical ritual. The hardware of the Earth is a system used to measure the ground sample distance and the resolving power of a satellite's camera. By photographing these precise, multi-kilometer grids, the state can determine if its orbital assets can distinguish between a civilian vehicle and a military asset. The desert has been converted into a giant lens test, a specialized laboratory where the geography of the north is used to refine the precision of the gaze. This is the industrialization of the vacuum. The state has treated the vastness of the Gobi as a disposable resource, a blank slate where they can build the mirrors for their digital eyes, ensuring that the surveillance apparatus remains sharp enough to monitor the movements of millions on the other side of the nation. The optical calibration ritual occurring in the Gobi is a technical necessity for the modern surveillance state. For a satellite to be effective, its sensors must be able to focus with a precision that borders on the impossible. The investigation into the geometry of these targets reveals a series of bar targets and tri-bar patterns, a specialized visual language used to determine the exact limits of a camera's resolution. These are the eye charts of the state. Each white line is a specific width, separated by a specific distance of dark desert earth. By analyzing how these lines appear in a high-altitude photograph, the engineers can teach the satellite how to see through the haze of the atmosphere. This is not a static process, it is a constant, repetitive calibration. The desert floor is a living part of the national security infrastructure, a place where the geography is sacrificed to ensure the perfection of the oversight. The scale of these targets is a direct indicator of the state's ambition. Some of these grids are larger than the metropolitan centers they are designed to watch. This was the conversion of the terrestrial world into a tool for the orbital world. The Gobi was selected because its lack of human activity and its consistent weather patterns provide a clean environment for these tests. The state isn't building a city in the sand, they are building a mirror for their own paranoia, a physical site where the machines are tuned to ensure that no movement on the surface of the Earth can remain anonymous or invisible. The investigation into the Gobi grids reveals a deeper, more unsettling layer of activity, the training of the algorithmic gaze. The desert is not just being used to calibrate the hardware, it is being used to teach the software how to watch us better. By creating artificial, urban layouts and military formations in the sand, the state provides a controlled environment for the development of automated tracking systems. These are the training grounds for the artificial intelligence that will eventually manage the national surveillance grid. The investigation into the 2024 and 2025 satellite updates shows a series of simulated airstrips and vehicle convoys that have been etched into the gravel. These are not real targets for bombs, but targets for data. The machines are learning to recognize the patterns of human logistics, the spacing of a truck convoy, the thermal signature of a parked jet, the movement of a crowd through a restricted zone. The landscape is being used to refine the algorithms of absolute oversight. This is the hollowing out of the desert to create a digital simulation in the physical world. The Gobi has become a specialized school for the surveillance state, a place where the geography is used to feed the appetite of a system that seeks to automate the identification of every citizen. The land is no longer a natural entity, it is a data set, a three-dimensional training manual for a future where the decision to watch, to track, and to intervene is handled by a processor in a hidden server farm. The geometry of absolute oversight is the final investigative thought on the transformation of the Gobi. The white lines and the artificial grids are the visible fingerprints of a state that has reached a level of technological maturity where it can use the Earth itself as a specialized tool. The investigation concludes that the desert is no longer a natural barrier or a forgotten wasteland, it is a high-functioning component of a global surveillance machine. By hollowing out the north to create these calibration sites, the state has ensured that the beautiful lie of the scenic south is maintained by the cold, technical reality of the desert. This is a landscape of absolute clarity. The Gobi targets are a reminder that the state's power is not just measured in its walls or its dams, but in its ability to see. The geography of the desert was traded for a level of orbital precision that allows the government to monitor the pulse of the nation from a distance. The impossible grids are the monuments of the 21st century, not built for the people to inhabit, but built for the machines to read. The state has moved the geography of control into the sky, leaving the desert floor to function as the hardware for a system of oversight that has no blind spots. As we look at these white lines from space, we are looking at the foundational geometry of a world where the land is used to teach the state how to watch us until the very concept of a private life is as eroded as the sandstone pillars of the south. The metallic ring of silence in the Gobi Desert is not a ruin, but a high-precision instrument for the calibration of orbital radar. The investigation into this Stonehenge formation reveals a circular arrangement of massive metallic blocks and retired fighter jets, all positioned to interact with the radar waves sent down from the state's newest surveillance satellites. This is a controlled desert environment where the natural stillness of the gravel is used as a baseline for measuring electronic signatures. The blocks are not random, they are specifically engineered to reflect radar energy in a way that allows the state to fine-tune its sensors. By placing decommissioned aircraft at the center of this ring, the military can analyze how much radar signal bounces back from a metallic object versus the surrounding clutter of the desert floor. This is a technical ritual of silence and noise. The state is testing the limits of its own eyes, ensuring that its satellites can distinguish a target from the background of the Earth. The Gobi provides the perfect laboratory for this exercise, away from the electronic interference of the industrial South. This was the conversion of a wasteland into a primary component of the national security infrastructure, a place where the geography of the North is used to refine the precision of a gaze that never closes. The Lab for Invisibility represents the next stage in the evolution of the Gobi testing sites. This is a specialized radar cross-section range, a physical site designed to measure how a stealth aircraft appears to an enemy sensor. The investigation reveals that the state uses these metallic blocks to simulate the radar returns of various environments, testing the palm-sized signature of its newest aircraft. This is the birthplace of the invisible fleet. In the world of modern air warfare, survival depends on the ability to scatter radar waves rather than reflect them. The blocks in the desert are used to measure the effectiveness of new radar-absorbent coatings and the specific angles of a jet's fuselage. By mounting scale models or full-sized prototypes on pedestals within this range, the state can determine exactly how visible they are from different altitudes and angles. This is a scientific hunt for the ghost. Every millimeter of the aircraft's surface is scrutinized to ensure it can move through defended airspace without leaving a digital fingerprint. The desert floor has been turned into a massive sensor array, a place where the state practices the art of hiding in plain sight. This is the industrialization of the vacuum, where the vastness of the North is used to protect the high-tech assets of the South, ensuring that the next generation of combat aviation can exist as a mere shadow on a screen. The geometry of scattering is the physical logic that governs the arrangement of the Gobi's metallic blocks. The investigation into the site's layout shows a deliberate effort to create radar clutter, a chaotic environment of electronic reflections that tests the advanced algorithms of the state sensors. In a real conflict, a stealth aircraft must be able to blend into the natural background noise of the Earth. The blocks in the desert are positioned to mimic this noise, challenging the radar to distinguish a high-priority target from a harmless geological feature. This is the physics of deception. The state is not just testing its planes, it is testing its ability to find the planes of its rivals. By analyzing how the radar waves interact with these geometric patterns, the engineers can develop new ways to filter out the clutter and isolate a hidden threat. The Gobi Range is a two-way laboratory. It is a place to refine invisibility and a place to master detection. This is the geometry of absolute oversight, where the land is manipulated to ensure that no object, no matter how small or well hidden, can remain anonymous. The state has built a physical sanctuary for secrecy, a place where the very concept of a radar-transparent future is being engineered, one block at a time, beneath the unblinking eye of the desert sun. The 2026 stealth breakthrough is the investigative payoff of the Gobi's long-term development. The recent official reveal of the J-35 and the significant upgrades to the J-20 fleet are the direct results of the testing conducted at sites like Radar Stonehenge. The investigation reveals that these aircraft, which are now entering serial production at a staggering rate, were perfected in the silence of the North. In early 2026, satellite imagery confirmed the presence of the newest J-35 variants, unpainted and coated in their green primer, undergoing final performance validations in these remote ranges. This was the moment the desert's secrets became operational. The state has moved from prototype development to high-rate industrial output, using the data gathered in the Gobi to ensure that its invisible fleet can challenge the dominance of Western air power. The 2026 campaign is a demonstration of industrial mass and technical precision. The desert was the womb for these machines, providing the isolation and the specialized hardware needed to transition from experimental shapes to frontline weapons. The state has successfully synchronized its geographical assets with its military ambitions, ensuring that the birthplace of its stealth fleet remains as inaccessible and as mysterious as the aircraft it was designed to create. The architecture of the Ghost is the final investigative thought on the transformation of the Gobi. The state has built a physical sanctuary for secrecy, a place where the land itself is used to ensure the military can move without being seen. The investigation concludes that the metallic blocks and the radar ranges are the foundations of a new kind of sovereignty, one that is defined by the ability to control the digital visibility of the nation. By hollowing out the desert to create these testing sites, the state has ensured that the beautiful lie of the scenic South is protected by the invisible guardians of the North. This is the vertical industrialization of secrecy. The mountain was for the tourist, but the desert is for the soldier. The Gobi is where the state learns to disappear. The Radar Stonehenge is a monument to a future where the geography of the Earth is no longer a physical barrier, but an electronic one. The state has successfully converted the vastness of its territory into a specialized tool for the protection of its most sensitive technology, leaving the desert floor to function as a laboratory for a world where the only thing more valuable than seeing is the power to remain unseen. The legal and physical perimeter of Base 20 defines a sovereign exclusion zone where the standard rules of civil administration do not apply. Deep in the interior of the Gobi, the state has carved out a territory that exists outside the public record, a specialized jurisdiction where 20,000 lives are managed as components of an orbital infrastructure. The investigation into the boundaries of Dongfeng reveals a multi-layered system of checkpoints, signal jammers, and high-altitude surveillance that ensures the isolation of the site. This is not a city in the traditional sense, it is a closed-loop ecosystem designed for a single industrial purpose. The geography of the base is a state secret, protected by a legal framework that treats any unauthorized entry as an act of espionage. The people who live here are not residents of a province, they are personnel of a mission. The state has created a vacuum of information, a place where the movement of every vehicle and the transmission of every data packet is logged and analyzed. This is the ultimate expression of the surveillance state, a city that was built to be invisible. The exclusion zone acts as a physical barrier to the truth, ensuring that the work being done on the launch pads remains a mystery to the outside world. By nationalizing the desert and the people within it, the state has achieved a level of control that is absolute. Base 20 is a sovereign island in a sea of gravel, a place where the human right to a private life has been traded for the collective security of a high-tech empire, leaving the inhabitants to function as the biological hardware of a ghost metropolis. Maintaining a high-functioning society in total desert isolation requires a specialized supply chain that functions with the precision of a military operation. The logistics of Base 20 are anchored by a dedicated rail line and a network of filtered communications that connect the ghost city to the industrial centers of the coast. Everything required for human survival, from fresh water and food to the specialized components for satellite assembly, must be transported across hundreds of miles of wasteland. The investigation into these supply routes reveals a system designed for total self-sufficiency. Dongfeng is not dependent on the regional economy of the Gobi, it is a direct extension of the central government's industrial ambition. The state has built its own power plants, its own water filtration systems, and its own hospitals within the perimeter, ensuring that the city can continue to function even if the rest of the nation is in crisis. This is the industrialization of the vacuum. The logistics are not just about survival, they are about maintaining a zero-leak environment. Every item that enters the base is vetted, and every piece of waste that leaves it is scrutinized. This is a closed-loop geography where the flow of resources is as tightly controlled as the flow of information. The city exists as a high-altitude laboratory, a place where the state has mastered the art of sustaining a massive population in a landscape that was never meant to support life, all to ensure that the work of the orbital machine can proceed without interruption. The personnel of Base 20 are the human cogs in a massive orbital machine, individuals whose identities have been subsumed by the state's industrial requirements. The investigation into the demographics of Dongfeng reveals a population composed of the nation's most elite scientists, engineers, and technicians, along with the families who support them. These people are the human ghosts of the Gobi, living in a society where their professional contributions are valued far above their personal aspirations. From the moment they enter the exclusion zone, their lives are governed by the schedule of the launch pads and the demands of the satellite assembly floors. This is a life of managed excellence. The state provides for their every physical need, modern housing, schools for their children, and recreational facilities, but the price of this comfort is a permanent loss of anonymity. Their movements are tracked, their conversations are monitored, and their social circles are restricted to other members of the base. This is the human cost of the high-tech frontier. The individual is a resource to be optimized, a biological asset that must be maintained at peak performance to ensure the success of the national security mission. By hollowing out the private lives of these 20,000 people, the state has created a workforce that is as reliable and as predictable as the hardware they build. They are the silent architects of the future, working in a place that does not officially exist, for a state that views their humanity as a technical detail to be managed. The social cost of living within a zero-leak environment is a psychological weight that defines the experience of Base 20. The investigation into the internal culture of the ghost city reveals a society built on the foundation of managed silence. In Dongfeng, the geography of the home is a state secret, and the details of one's work can never be shared, even with a spouse or a child. This creates a unique form of social isolation, where 20,000 people live in close proximity yet remain fundamentally disconnected from the world outside the perimeter. The state enforces this silence through a combination of technical oversight and psychological conditioning. Residents are taught from an early age that the security of the nation depends on their ability to keep secrets. This is the hollowing of the social bond. The community is held together not by shared history or cultural tradition, but by a shared commitment to a state-mandated mission. The lack of privacy and the constant awareness of being watched create a culture of self-censorship, where every word is weighed for its potential impact on one's security clearance. This is the architecture of the Ghost, a city where the most intimate spaces are subject to the same level of scrutiny as the launch pads. The inhabitants live in a state of permanent professional alert, their personal lives sacrificed to maintain the integrity of the vacuum, ensuring that the work of the surveillance state can proceed in a world where the very concept of a leak has been engineered out of existence. Base 20 functions as the ultimate model for a future where entire cities are built as specialized hardware for the state. The legacy of Dongfeng is not just in the satellites it launches or the missiles it tests, but in the social and legal framework it has pioneered. The investigation concludes that the Ghost City is a prototype for a new kind of urbanism, one that is defined by absolute oversight, logistical isolation, and the total subordination of the individual to the industrial requirements of the state. As the nation expands its high-tech infrastructure, the model of the sovereign exclusion zone is being replicated in other remote regions, from the deep-sea bases of the south to the data centers of the west. This is the vertical industrialization of the human experience. The state has proven that it can build a high-functioning, modern society that is entirely decoupled from the civil world, a place where every person is a specialist and every activity is a data point. The human ghost in the machine is the final product of this evolution. Base 20 is the physical manifestation of a state that has reached the limits of its ambition, a place where the geography, the technology, and the people have all been merged into a single, seamless engine of power. As we look at the lights of Dongfeng from the desert floor, we are looking at a future where the city is no longer a place for people to live, but a machine for the state to operate, a silent and invisible monument to the end of the private world. The 2024 and 2025 clearing of traditional nomadic grazing routes in the northern Gobi represents the final eviction of a lifestyle that has existed for millennia. For the families who have moved their herds across these gravel plains for generations, the land was a living map of seasonal water and ancestral shelter. The investigation into the latest state directives reveals a systematic reclassification of these vast territories as ballistic impact zones. This was not a move driven by urban expansion or environmental protection, but by the technical requirements of long-range weaponry. The state required a sterile, human-free expanse where the latest orbital and terrestrial hardware could be tested without the risk of civilian witnesses. The nomadic herders were not given a choice, they were informed that their grazing rights had been terminated in the name of national security. This was a geographical cleansing. The state replaced the ancient, irregular paths of the animals with the rigid, calculated coordinates of a firing range. By 2025, the northern interior had been effectively emptied of its human population, turning an inhabited wilderness into a restricted laboratory for the science of destruction. This is the industrialization of the void. The people who once understood the language of the wind and the sand have been resettled into concrete housing blocks on the edge of the desert, their culture treated as a secondary variable in a military equation. The land they left behind is now a forbidden zone, a place where the only movement allowed is the descent of a high-speed projectile, ensuring that the secrets of the state's hardware remain undisturbed by the eyes of the people. The ancient corridors of the Silk Road, once the primary arteries of global trade and cultural exchange, have been reconfigured into a weaponized spine for the transport of high-yield military hardware. The investigation into the modern infrastructure of the Gansu and Xinjiang provinces reveals a network of high-security rail lines and reinforced highways that serve a single industrial purpose, the rapid deployment of the nation's orbital and ballistic assets. This is the militarization of history. The routes that once carried silk, spices, and ideas are now used to carry the components of the surveillance state. The state has invested billions in a logistical network that is shielded from public view, using the natural isolation of the desert to protect the movement of its most sensitive technology. The weaponized Silk Road is a closed system, a private geography where the flow of goods is as tightly controlled as the flow of information at Base 20. This transformation has turned the historical symbol of connectivity into a tool of absolute sovereignty. The ancient trade hubs have been replaced by fortified logistic centers, where the personnel are the only residents and the cargo is a state secret. By using the existing geography of the North as a foundation for its military ambitions, the state has ensured that the northern interior is no longer a gateway to the world, but a fortress designed to protect the national core. This is the hollowing out of a global heritage, where the physical remains of the past are used to anchor the machinery of a high-tech future. The paradox of the Gobi is that the parts of the desert that appear the emptiest are actually the most heavily monitored square meters of the national territory. To the casual observer, the vast stretches of gravel and sand look like a vacuum of activity, a place where no one is watching because there is nothing to see. The investigation into the unseen zones reveals a technical reality that is the exact opposite. Every square meter of the forbidden impact zones is under the constant oversight of high-altitude sensors, ground-based radar, and automated seismic detectors. The state has created a landscape where unseen does not mean unwatched. This is the ultimate expression of the surveillance state, a geography that is so sensitive it must remain empty of human life to ensure the integrity of its data. The vacuum is a requirement for the machine. By removing the people, the state has eliminated the noise of human activity, creating a clean environment where every electronic signal and every thermal signature can be tracked with absolute precision. This is the industrialization of the void. The desert is not a wasteland. It is a high-functioning component of a national security machine. The lack of people is not a sign of neglect, but a sign of intense focus. The state has turned the vacuum into a specialized tool, a place where the geography is used to protect the secrets of the gaze, ensuring that the only entity allowed to exist in this space is the unblinking eye of the surveillance apparatus. The Shroud of the North is the final investigative thought on the transformation of the Gobi. The desert has become the ultimate expression of state power, a place where geography is used to delete the presence of the human to protect the secrets of the machine. The investigation concludes that the forced displacement of the nomads, the weaponization of the Silk Road, and the creation of the forbidden impact zones are all parts of a singular industrial plan. The state has successfully converted the vastness of its territory into a specialized sanctuary for secrecy. This is the architecture of the ghost, a landscape where the land is used to ensure the government can see everything without being seen itself. The beautiful lie of the scenic South, with its high-definition tourist paths and staged authenticity, is only possible because of the cold, technical reality of the North. The Gobi is where the state learns to disappear, a place where the geography is sacrificed to ensure the survival of the surveillance state. As we look at the silent, empty stretches of the Gansu interior, we are looking at the end of the terrestrial world as we knew it. The land is no longer a home for people, it is a hardware for the state. The shroud is absolute, a permanent reminder that in a world of absolute oversight, the only way to protect a secret is to ensure that no one is left to tell it. The investigation into these four disparate landscapes reveals a unified industrial logic that defines the modern state. From the flooded streets of Shi Cheng to the calibrated white lines of the Gobi, the DNA of the planning committees is identical. The state does not view geography as a heritage to be preserved, but as a disposable resource to be optimized for a specific national output. In the south, the valley was sacrificed for the kilowatt. In the mountains, the sacred peaks were sacrificed for the global brand. In the north, the desert was sacrificed for the orbital gaze. This is the vertical industrialization of the national territory. The 290,000 displaced residents of the Xianan River and the 1,000-year history of the Tujia are treated as secondary variables in a hydraulic and commercial equation. The state has moved beyond the era of simple territorial control and into an era of geographical engineering, where the land itself is a component of a larger machine. This is a cold, calculated trade-off. The physical reality of the country is being liquidated to fund a high-definition future. The investigation shows that these locations are not separate anomalies, but a single, integrated system of extraction and oversight. Whether it is the turquoise water of a reservoir or the metallic blocks of a radar range, the purpose remains the same: to turn the Earth into a specialized tool for the maintenance of absolute power, ensuring that the geography of the nation serves the ambitions of the center at any human or environmental cost. The impossible beauty of the national image is built on a foundation of systematic silencing. The investigation into the staged authenticity of Zhangjiajie and the scenic void of the Gobi reveals that the state's most impressive achievements are actually masks for massive human sacrifices. The 290,000 who watched their homes drown, the Tujia who were forced to become performers in their own mountains, and the nomads who were evicted from their grazing routes are the silent witnesses to this progress. Their lives have been hollowed out to create the beautiful lie that the world sees on its screens. This is the true cost of the impossible, a generation of people whose ancestral wealth and cultural identity have been converted into electricity, ticket sales, and ballistic data. The state has mastered the art of aesthetic displacement, using 4K accessibility and Hollywood branding to distract from the physical and social erosion occurring beneath the surface. The people are not the beneficiaries of this development, they are the fuel for it. By nationalizing the sacred and weaponizing the void, the state has ensured that the individual is always subordinate to the industrial mission. This is a landscape where the human heart has been replaced by a mechanical pulse, leaving the original inhabitants to mourn in a country that no longer recognizes their existence. The progress, we are told to admire, is a performance of power that requires the total erasure of the people who once called these landscapes home. The geography of deception is maintained through a sophisticated layer of technological and cultural oversight. The state uses the tools of modern accessibility, high-speed lifts, glass bridges, and digital branding, to create a curated version of the landscape that masks its internal deterioration. The investigation concludes that the more visible a location becomes to the public, the more its actual substance is being hollowed out. The staged authenticity of the ethnic minorities is a strategic distraction, a way to monetize a culture while simultaneously destroying the conditions that allow it to survive. This is a process of ecological and social replacement. The state markets a pristine, sacred environment in the south while using the north as a landfill for its electronic refuse and a firing range for its weapons. This duality is essential to the maintenance of the national narrative. The deception is not just in what is shown, but in what is hidden. The contaminated karst caves and the scorched impact zones are the physical reality of the state's ambition, yet they are excluded from the official maps. The land is being used to tell a story of harmony and innovation, but the investigation reveals a story of trauma and extraction. The state has successfully converted its territory into a series of stage sets, where the scenic surface is a thin veneer designed to protect the secrets of the machine from the eyes of the people. The final revelation of this investigation is that these 4 locations are not separate entities, but a single, integrated machine designed to monitor and manage the future. The flooded city, the renamed mountain, the calibrated grid, and the ghost metropolis are the physical nodes of a national security apparatus that has no blind spots. By connecting the displacement of the south to the weaponization of the north, we can see the full architecture of the state's ambition. This is not just about dams or satellites, it is about the total control of the terrestrial and orbital worlds. The state has built a sanctuary for secrecy where the land is used to teach the machines how to watch us better. This is the vertical industrialization of the gaze. The beautiful lie of the landscape is the ultimate tool of oversight, a way to ensure that the public is looking at the peaks while the state is looking at them from the void. The investigation has finally identified the eye that is looking back. It is not the eye of a god or a guardian, but the eye of a system that has sacrificed the soul of its geography to achieve absolute clarity. As we look at the white lines in the Gobi and the drowned archways of the Lion City, we are looking at the foundational geometry of a world where the land is no longer ours, and the machines have finally learned how to see us for who we really are.